Hello.
Hello.
Welcome back to the Parenting Teenagers course, Session 4. We hope you're finding the course useful and have been able to put some new ideas into practice.
This session is about helping our teenagers to be emotionally healthy. There's generally a lot of emotion flying around in a home with teenagers, from them and us. Many of these emotions are very natural, partially the result of hormones and partially the result of the huge changes that are taking place during adolescence.
One of the issues we're going to be looking at is helping our teenagers to handle stress. As we've already said, our daughter Kirsty went through a hard time in her final year at school.
At one point, she was convinced she had a hole in her lung so that the air was leaking out and she couldn't take enough breaths. She has always had a very vivid imagination regarding unusual illnesses that she thought she'd contracted.
The doctor diagnosed it as stress. As the oldest child and very conscientious, she was inclined to take on too much responsibility for the welfare of the whole family, not least her three far less conscientious brothers.
She said later, no one else in the family had ever struggled from stress, and I remember feeling very much the odd one out. The boys thought I had gone completely mad when they saw me sitting on our sofa breathing into a paper bag, a short-term remedy for hyperventilation. However, I felt totally safe at home, and they would manage to make me laugh even when I thought I was on the verge of death. They were always, quite rightly, very clear that I probably wasn't.
One of the most important tasks of parenting teenagers is helping them to handle their emotions in a healthy way. This is vital if we're to equip them to form strong relationships and to live to their full potential.
We're going to start by looking at anger, how we handle our anger and how we teach them to handle theirs. Then, in the second part, we'll look at how we handle conflict effectively with our teenagers. And finally, as we've mentioned, how to handle stress.
All of this helps to protect them from damaging patterns of behaviour, such as being out of control, withdrawing emotionally, sexual promiscuity, drug and alcohol abuse, or an eating disorder.
As we start on the subject of anger, it's important to recognise that we need to read each child individually. Each one is unique. They'll have different characters and temperaments and will react in different ways.
Ours certainly did. One son is very emotional and confrontational. Our daughter has always been much more compliant. Another son has always wanted to argue every boundary. And the third has a very calm exterior and avoids confrontation if at all possible. Our task as parents was to try to help them all equally.
So how do we help them to handle their anger?
We need to really acknowledge that anger is an emotion that we will all feel at different times, and sometimes we don't allow children the space to express anger. It's like we close it down, but anger does need to be expressed appropriately. And if we don't allow our children and young people to talk about the things that have made them angry, then sometimes it'll just go in on them and it'll come out in other ways, sometimes an eating disorder or depression. And so it is really important that we deal with the whole subject of anger and deal with it in a healthy way and not be fearful of it, but really train and help and encourage our children to use it as a positive strength in the right way.
The emotion of anger is not wrong in itself. It's a response to an event that has upset us. We might have been frustrated, irritated, worried or hurt. It's the signal that something is amiss. Anger, in this sense, acts rather like the temperature warning light in the car that prompts us to take action. And it's essential we do, unless we're to suffer the consequences.
We're right to be angry where there's injustice, but it's the way we express anger and the action we take that is critical. And learning to control and manage anger is part of a child's journey to maturity.
Well, what makes me angry is, I guess I get angry at sometimes the littlest of things, but what really makes me angry is just people who, I look around, especially in America and stuff, and my own high school, I see kids who are bullied, I see kids who are naive, teenagers who think they're all that, mostly seniors in high school. And that just infuriates me, and sometimes I'll go up and talk to the person, or sometimes I'll turn around, kick something and move on, but I do get angry quite a lot. I try to control it though, but I'm doing better at it now. But
when I get angry, I usually just go crazy and like probably lash out at someone. But like recently, I've been trying to just get over it, and it's actually pretty good timing. But like just get over, try and not get wound up by what people do or what I've done to someone, and then they've retaliated, and then I feel that I should lash back. But it is hard to control yourself.
Well, sometimes if I had a long day or something, the smallest things can set me off into a huge rage. Like the internet's down for 10 minutes or something. I can lose it just from that. And because I get really frustrated. It takes me quite a long time to get rid of that anger. I have to punch stuff and shout and just generally go on like a warpath. So yeah, just sometimes it's just the littlest things can say, especially if you're tired. They just set you off and you just go crazy and shout at everyone.
It can be hard for our teenagers to learn to handle their anger appropriately. There may be underlying issues they're dealing with, and they'll be at different stages of maturity.
For most children, it'll be a slow and difficult journey, and they'll need all of the 18 or so years they're with us to learn how to express their anger in a mature way.
Words like anger management and getting in touch with your emotions have been fashionable phrases for the last couple of decades. But what we really need to teach our children is that, yes, it's important for them to be able to express anger and their emotions in general. But there's a very big difference between simply expressing those feelings whenever they want, however they want, in front of whoever they want, and doing it in a way which is constructive. And that's a very big difference, which I don't think a lot of people have allowed children to develop. They've given them carte blanche, the right to express their anger and emotions however they want. And our children have to learn that there's a time and a place and a way, and that the way that they express anger and emotions will have an impact on someone else's feelings.
There are two dangers with handling anger. One is that anger is uncontrolled. The other is that anger is unexpressed. We use the behaviour of two animals, a rhino and a hedgehog, to illustrate these two unhelpful approaches.
A rhino, if it's provoked, is liable to put down its head and charge, whereas a hedgehog, if it's threatened, will curl itself up in a ball and stick out its prickles to keep whatever is threatening it at a distance.
The rhino is like those whose anger is not controlled. They give free rein to their feelings. They don't wait to discover if their anger is misplaced or distorted. They tend to be aggressive with their words and maybe aggressive with their behaviour.
I am very much at the rhino end of the spectrum. No surprise, I'm sure, from what you already know of me. My tendency when I'm angry is to let rip and express exactly what I'm feeling with great passion, which can be a bit like having a hurricane going through the house. Over the years, I've had to learn to control my temper and my moods for the sake of the rest of the family, which was probably one of the biggest challenges for me in parenting. I recognised that my uncontrolled anger would be damaging to our family life.
But equally damaging is anger which is bottled up and not expressed, as this can lead to growing resentment or isolation, and ultimately a breakdown of communication altogether. The hedgehog is like those whose anger is suppressed, which is my danger. I want to keep the peace at all costs, so I'm inclined to keep any hurt to myself. As a result, Scylla and the children have often been unaware of what they've done or said to upset me. I've had to remember to talk about my feelings rather than to bury them, and to allow others in the family to bring hurt and anger out into the open, rather than trying to shut the anger down. Then it can be sorted out rather than left to fester.
There's one of our children who brings out the worst in both of us, unfortunately, and I probably think you behave like a rhino with her more than anyone else.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's made worse by, I think if life is pressured and stressed, if we've got a lot going on, you're more of a rhino, and you're generally much better when...
Yeah.
On the few occasions life isn't so stressful.
Yeah. So I think that's probably how anger
comes
comes out in us, as at home.
In our family, I say that we've got different ways of showing anger. I mean, there's no doubt about it that I'm the more confrontational one in this marriage. And also, one of my sons is more confrontational than the other. So it's interesting to see that. And so the son that is a bit more like me. I get really upset and really shout and rant and everything, although he'll be always very apologetic afterwards when he's reflected on it, just as hopefully I am too. But whereas it's different with Vincent and with Daniel.
I think we learned early on that the way that we handle anger has a huge impact on the children and how they handle it. So, for example, I think when we got really frustrated and maybe I got really angry, that perhaps the louder children in our family would also get angry and loud, whereas one of them would actually retreat. And we realised that this had to be sorted, really, because it really wasn't helpful, because they do just do as you do and not as you say.
It's a great help to be aware of our own tendency towards rhino or hedgehog behaviour, whether we're explosive or bottle up. And we can learn to control and change the way we respond.
We'll all have to adjust the way we handle our anger to some degree for the sake of our family life. We may have learned unhelpful patterns from our parents, but we don't have to pass these on to our children.
One other aspect of anger to be aware of is what's called displaced anger. This is when someone who carries a root of anger from the past dumps it on another person. This is very destructive and will be particularly damaging if a parent dumps their anger on a child.
If we recognise that this is our problem, we must deal with it. We may need professional help to identify the source of our anger and work through the process of forgiveness. We may not feel like it, but it's absolutely essential for our own emotional and physical health.
This is a vital part of creating a home that is free from fear, a home where the prevailing atmosphere is calm, safe and accepting.
We're going to look now at some helpful ways to manage our anger effectively. The first one is don't overreact. Some anger from us and our teenagers is a normal part of family life, and sometimes our children's behaviour warrants us showing them we're cross. But we have to ask ourselves, how often is it happening, and is our anger out of control and damaging our relationships?
It's no good if we're continually overreacting and our children or our partner is living in fear of the next explosion or cutting remark.
With our teenagers, we'll lose their respect and trust. It'll be more difficult for them to come to us to talk something through. They'll only do that if they feel safe about how we're likely to respond.
For many teenagers, with the emotional changes, their testosterone, their hormones, their brain changes, they themselves may really be struggling to control their anger, and there's a lot of evidence for that. So they really do need to see their parents modelling that you can control anger. Being angry, yes, communicating your anger, your frustration, but in a controlled adult manner, not losing it, yelling, screaming, shouting. Although at times, you know, occasional Barney in a family, there's nothing wrong with it, we work through it, but the general controlling of anger, moderation of it is vitally important.
You know, when I struggle with some of the things that I've done that I'm not proud of, I will go to Mum, because she knows how to deal with it, which is good. And the important thing is she doesn't overreact, you know.
Constantly overreacting can push them away from us and into the influence of others. Ultimately, they'll stop listening to us.
It's helpful for each of us to identify what's likely to trigger our overreaction. I recognised it was when our children were unkind to each other. That was a flashpoint for me.
For me, there was a much longer list. I was more likely to overreact when I was tired or under pressure, or particularly if I was worried about one of the children. My list also included if there was a deadline involved, such as catching a train or a ferry. Any of those were triggers for me.
There are 4 very common reasons which can cause any of us, parent or teenager, to overreact or lose it. The acronym HALT has helped us to bear them in mind.
H stands for hungry. It's helpful to recognise that we're more likely to overreact when our blood sugar level is low.
A is for anxious. When we're anxious about our teenagers or something else, we're more liable to be on a short fuse.
L is for lonely. We may be short-tempered if our emotional tank is running low or we feel isolated.
T is for tired. Feeling tired or under pressure is probably the most common reason for overreacting.
In order not to overreact so often, I found it helpful to press an imaginary pause button. So I'd say to myself, you are about to lose it. And the best thing for me to do then was to go out of the room to cool off and get back in control. Most of what I've said and later regretted has been in the first 30 seconds.
I think I'm a rhino, only because of the approach I take. I charge at things, but one of the challenges I've had was actually recognizing that I was in fact a rhino. So now what I do is I step back. If I try to catch myself literally from screaming, only because I know the effects it has on my children.
Yes, I do have to think about stopping myself overreacting. There have been particular periods, I think, where I've suddenly become aware that, well, Matthew was the first as the oldest, where it felt like a challenge to me. If I said black was black, he'd tell me it was white, and whatever I said was wrong. I knew nothing, and it was tough. It is tough. It's been a bit better. So I've consciously decided not to react to that as best I can, but sometimes I do. I can't help myself. And then I think so when I have overreacted and then realised it afterwards and cooled down, I have found myself apologising for doing so to them.
We've learnt that we've had to pause, otherwise we're in danger of overreacting, or certainly I am. And I can remember situations where I've been so alarmed and I've tried desperately not to show it, and I've had to go away and just sort it out and actually come back and choose my words very carefully. And that is an art I had to learn, because I was always in danger of overreacting out of alarm. But it's really not helpful to do that with teenagers.
Second, in handling anger effectively, don't be hurtful. It's so easy in the heat of the moment to label our teenager by saying something like, "You're so stupid," or "rude," or "selfish," or "stubborn." These labels are very hurtful and can go deep and will be remembered.
And that's very different from labelling an aspect of their behaviour. For example, that was a selfish thing to do, or that was an unkind or rude way to speak to so-and-so.
When we focus on the behaviour rather than attack their character, we're giving them the opportunity to change.
If you are constantly giving your child the message that they are not clever, cheeky, going to end up on the rubbish heap of life, then this is likely to be what will happen to them. It will become a self-fulfilling prophecy. There are sort of softer ways of doing that. If your child is clumsy, for example, you may never even say the word clumsy, but if every time they drop something you go, as if, what did I expect? That's a message to your child that you see them as clumsy. And the thing about being clumsy, as everybody knows, once you become conscious about clumsiness, then you're much more likely to become clumsy. So be careful about the labels that you maybe put on your child, because they can so easily become self-fulfilling prophecies.
Previously, I told the story of Benj setting off for Europe without his money belt. On reflection, rather than saying, "You're useless, you won't make it to Dover," I wish I'd said something like, "Do you think that really is the best place to keep your money?"
Third, in managing anger, don't withdraw. This applies particularly to people with hedgehog tendencies, like me, who in the face of anger can bottle up resentment, back off, become passive or disengage. The strongest temptation can be to avoid any confrontation at all and hope that by withdrawing it will go away. But anger doesn't just go away. When anger is buried, it's buried alive. This can then lead to a cold atmosphere where teenagers feel there's a general sense of their parents' unvoiced disapproval, but where nothing is said.
With the family, there's going to be different personalities, and conflict is going to be a normal part of family life. I think we have to check what's our view about conflict, because if it's something we see that we want to avoid, then we just will ignore or hide some of the issues. But if we see conflict as an opportunity of finding out more, of learning to negotiate, then we can see it in a more positive way. But we don't always, as parents, see that.
Living with a parent who constantly overreacts is like living on the edge of a smouldering volcano. Living with a parent who withdraws emotionally is like living in the barrenness of the Arctic. Neither of these reactions will help our relationship with our teenager, nor will they help our teenagers to learn how to handle their emotions in a mature way.
We want to go on to look at how we help our teenagers to use anger productively. What we're aiming for is neither aggression, like the rhino, nor suppression, like the hedgehog, but a healthy expression of the cause of their anger.
It's important as well that they know they can express their anger, because I don't want them suppressing everything, apart from at my convenience. But, you know, really, that's healthy in a way, and in their own home, they need to be able to express their anger. So, as I say, one is just naturally more volatile, and the other one is just a really kind of more passive person. And so for him to get angry was really unusual. But definitely between the two of them, they did argue. But one thing that was certainly a help for us, and we really appreciated this, was the fact that the boys had their own rooms. And a lot of people around where we live wouldn't have that luxury. But at least you could send one to one room and one to the other. So that helped. So I would say, actually, that's an important part of family life, is you do get angry. It's not just trying to avoid it all the time, but it's how you deal with it at the time and afterwards. And I think the boys are both really good now at saying to us, oh, you know, maybe a day later, I'm really sorry Mama was out of order. As hopefully, you know, I say that to them many times as well.
On this journey of our teenagers learning to express anger appropriately, we shouldn't expect too much too soon. As we've said, it's a slow process throughout their upbringing. A young child typically will display anger in an uncontrolled way through ventilation, that is, crying, yelling or screaming, and through aggression, throwing things, hitting, kicking and so on.
Our aim is to help our teenager to talk about the reason for their anger in a controlled way. Of course, easier said than done when your 13-year-old daughter is yelling at you that you're the worst parent in the world and she wants her own house key now, or your 15-year-old son won't even look at you and is moody and uncommunicative. It can feel as if talking about the issue is impossible. And we're not suggesting we should let our teenagers say what they like when they like.
With teenagers, the question of should you allow them to express themselves in bad language or in shouting or stomping about the house, for me, no. Because I feel that you may be a mixed up teenager, but actually in my house you know better than to swear at your mother or your father, your brothers or your sisters, and I don't want door slamming, and I think that teenagers should learn control. They have control with their friends. They are capable of control. And although some people may say, well, at home, maybe they should be able to express it, I personally don't think so. And I think that if you say you can swear at me or shout at me, and that's okay, then you'll just get more of the same, and it's unpleasant.
What we're talking about here is a hard balance. We have to let them express their anger, even when it comes out in immature ways, remembering they're on this learning curve, while not allowing them total free rein to say and do what they like.
Child psychologist Ross Campbell writes, "We cannot train children to express their anger in mature ways simply by getting upset and forcing them to stop expressing their anger. We must allow them to express it verbally, even though that may be unpleasant. Why? The best way to express anger is verbally and pleasantly. But children can't learn to do this if they're not allowed to verbalise it at all."
The commonest danger for us as parents is to respond to anger with anger, or to shut them down and not to allow them to express negative feelings at all.
I actually help the child by allowing the child to tell me what it is what are you angry about? Why do you think you're feeling like that? Why do you think, what has made you angry? And there actually was one point, it was me. The child was angry with me. And I said to, because of counselling I had in the past, and during that counselling they taught me how to deal with my anger, I just used the same sort of, so I said, you know, I mean, when it was me, I was told to use a pillow and literally punch the pillow. So I said to my child, I said, well, I don't want you to punch me, but just say exactly what it is, you know. So we used that as therapy, and the child was able to tell me where it is I had gone wrong. I have ignored the child. The child felt rejected, and the child literally told me how much, I hate you, and things like that. And I sat in front of the child and just listened. And I could see the difference. Even the child's body language changed because the child was able to say to me, this is what you did to me, this is what you've done to me. And also, I was the one that went to divorce my husband. I filed for divorce, and this child was very angry, said, you've ruined my life, you've done this, you've done that, So we talked about it, and it took months and months and months of just talking. And I saw how things turned around because the child was able to voice what the child felt towards me, and it was very much towards me.
Our home needs to be a safe place to express strong and sometimes negative emotions. For some children, that will involve working through the painful experience of their parents' separation.
For me, as a 9-year-old kid, it just flipped my whole world around, just in that split second. And instead of, having these two parents who, to you, were just, the best thing in the world, they never got upset, they never got angry, they were just rock solid. To see them both, in tears about this sort of thing, just made me, in, that split second, so much more mature. I was considering their feelings when I don't think I ever had before. I saw my dad sitting there, and I saw my mum, and my brother and sister cuddling my mum, and I thought to myself at that moment, I'm not upset. I just want to go hug my dad to make sure he's okay. And parents don't get that. They don't realise that they've been the primary role model, and they've always been strong and tough. That kids for the first time see their parents as human beings with an emotional side. It's quite scary for the kid.
Parents will always be the two most important people to any child, and when families separate, it is grief for children and young people. It is a form of grief. I mean, if somebody dies, if a parent dies, then there is a process and everyone supports the family. When it's separation, there isn't the same process. So there's huge grief, but there isn't always the support because families get confused as to what to do.
The grief needs to be talked through. If you find yourself in a situation where your child is struggling with strong emotions, which is being displayed as anger, that's constantly out of control, we'd encourage you to seek professional help for them, as well as yourself.
Whatever our family circumstances, talking about ways to manage anger is much more productive at calmer moments.
Taking opportunities to discuss with them anger scenes in TV programmes or films, or a street incident of road rage, can help us talk about how best to handle anger at a time when we or they aren't angry.
This managing of anger, difficult though it may be, is part of equipping them to be emotionally healthy.
We've put some questions in your manual to help you to think about these ways of handling anger in your own situation.